The president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document, which he was sworn to uphold?
Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln.
I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution.
When we do have secret prisons, that is not what America's all about.
Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. Hearings about Benghazi. Well, you may think we've heard it all before, but there was pretty riveting testimony from a certain Gregory Hicks, who was the deputy ambassador to Libya, I believe. Is that correct? I'm asking. My guest is Ari Ratner, and he is a former State Department official, so I just want to get my facts right there. So Gregory Hicks gave very riveting testimony before the committee, the House committee, headed by Darrell Issa, who is determined to get to the bottom of this. But what is there to get to the bottom of? What exactly did happen in Benghazi? Why are Republicans so incensed about it? Is this just a ploy to get rid of Hillary Clinton? Or are there some real facts there that maybe even if it's a cover-up? We're going to explore these questions, like I said, with Ari Ratner. Now, he is a former State Department official. He's a former special assistant to the Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, basically the number 5 at the State Department. And Ari, your job there was to look out for anything involving the Middle East.
Correct. So I worked for that official who was in charge for everything economic around the world, and I was his Mideast advisor.
His Mideast advisor. That's a pretty still large portfolio. Everything in the Mideast, I assume that's from Afghanistan to Morocco and everything in between.
The way the State Department defines it's from Morocco to Iran, everything you'd think of, except for Turkey and Sudan. But no Afghanistan,
okay, so
no Pakistan.
Not quite that far east.
Not quite that far.
But that's still a lot to worry about. So before we get to the politics and the hearings and the explosive stuff that's come out about talking memos and so forth, I really want to understand what happened in Benghazi. And to that effect, I want to play, just to start, just a little bit of what we heard from Gregory Hicks this week.
Went into another building. They were unable to enter the Tactical Operations Center in Benghazi because of improvements to that facility that had been made. Scott attempted to lead the ambassador and Sean Smith out of the burning building. He managed to make it out. He tried repeatedly to go back in to try to rescue Sean and the ambassador, but had to stop due to exposure to smoke. The response team from the annex in Benghazi, 6 individuals, drove the attackers out of our compound and secured it temporarily. There have been estimates as high as 60 attackers were in the compound at one particular time.
So this is Gregory Hicks, and what he's describing is the time when the attackers come in, they get in the consulate, and then they call out to what they call the annex. We're going to get to that in just a second. Where 6 very brave Americans apparently managed to hold off 60, at least for a limited amount of time. Of course, in that horrific episode, our ambassador died, as well as 3 other Americans. So let me go through, first of all, before the day began, because it's been reported everywhere, but apparently in this hearing, that the annex is really a CIA building. They don't say that publicly, but again, every press has reported it. And it's very interesting just what we were doing to begin with. So let me just go back to the question of our policy in Libya. So we're in Libya. We help the people overthrow Gaddafi. We help particularly the people of Benghazi. I mean, they're the ones who Gaddafi was threatening to kill. But before we even get to this incident, because we have a lot of time, I want to go through the background. Explore with me Libya a year ago. So it's the fall of Gaddafi. Right before this episode, what is Libya like? Who's in charge?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And
Excuse me, go ahead.
No problem. Happens in my mind a lot, especially in playoff time. It's a wonderful question. I should start by saying that I left the government a year ago. So when this attack happened, I wasn't in the government. I happened to be in Cairo on the day of. We can talk about that.
Oh, I do want to talk about that.
But on a business mission that was affiliated with the State Department. But the situation in Libya a year ago was very difficult, and it has been for quite a long time, as it is in much of the Middle East. We entered Libya almost 2 years ago now to prevent a massacre. This was at the beginning of the Arab Spring. Tunisia had had a revolution, a neighbor of Libya. Egypt had had a revolution, a neighbor of Libya. The people of Libya rose up against what, by all accounts, was a horrible dictator for many years, including a very horrible nemesis of America for many years. He was on the verge of massacring a number of Libyans in Benghazi. We intervened together with the Arab League, our allies in Europe, many people around the world, prevented a terrible massacre.
And for the record, I supported our intervention in Libya before we even did it. So
Yeah.
I'm very much on record here. I like to use U.S. power to prevent massacres whenever possible. That's probably why we're both part of the Truman National Security Project.
And I was there at the time.
But all revolutions are imperfect, and it's not like you go in and Gaddafi's gone and suddenly it's paradise in the Garden of Eden in Libya. In order to get rid of him without U.S. troops, which I also supported, I didn't think we needed troops on the ground in any significant numbers. That meant we had to rely on Libyan militias or local Libyan groups to overthrow their dictator. Now, they wanted to overthrow their dictator, but they have other agendas too.
It's absolutely right. I think one of the things we've learned in the Arab Spring, it's very easy to topple someone, and this is not us mostly toppling, it's internally. It's very difficult to build a functioning society. It's been particularly difficult in Libya, where Gaddafi, for almost 40 years, systematically destroyed anything that there was to be Libyan aside from Gaddafi himself. So there's no functioning state, there's really no functioning army in a real sense. All there is was tribal affiliations, of which these militias formed out of.
How many tribes are in Libya?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm not an expert on Libya.
Hundreds?
A few core main ones, mostly geographically.
3 or 4 or 5.
Yes, the country is really best thought of geographically between east and west and north and south. South, you're getting to very desert area. It's really the north that's primarily populated.
95% of the population lives along the coast.
All along the coast.
Right, okay.
All the oil's everywhere, and it's a very small country.
It's basically Tripoli in the west and Benghazi in the east.
Exactly.
Extremely large geographic country, extremely small populated country.
Extremely small populated, and it's a wealthy country. This is one of the real tragedies of Libya. If you could get a modicum of security, there's so much wealth that will be brought back into the country from what Gaddafi had scurried away, as well as what's already in the ground.
So if it's split geographically, would you say there's sort of the Benghazi tribes and then the Tripoli tribes and maybe the tribes in the middle?
Yeah.
But would there be more than one tribe, let's say, in Benghazi? Because Benghazi, those were the people that called out to us first. They were the people that were liberated first. They were the people who Gaddafi threatened to go into their houses and their closets and kill every last one of them. Benghazi, if there's any place where Americans should be treated as heroes, you'd think it would be Benghazi.
Absolutely, and we should look, there's ethnic groups, there's also ideological groupings. So within any ethnic group, you have different ideological streams. And it is absolutely true that America was, at the time of the revolution, very popular in Libya, particularly in Benghazi, including Ambassador Stevens. And even after this terrible attack, you had a number of Libyans come out to confront these militia groups head on. So it's a very mixed picture because you have different groups with different ideological backings as well.
Okay. Now, we're in Libya. Of course, the capital is Tripoli, which is some 600 miles to the west. So that's, I guess, a 10-hour drive on the best roads.
Yeah.
Presumably in Libya, that's probably a 20-hour drive, I suspect. But it's far away. I mean, that's the distance in America.
It's quite a distance.
That's quite a distance. And so that's where our embassy is. That's where our embassy was. That's where our embassy was forever. It is the capital of Libya. Now, did we have a consulate in Benghazi under Gaddafi, or was that something that was set up afterwards? Do you know?
It's an interesting question. I'm not entirely sure. I think we had a presence in Benghazi, but I could be wrong on that.
Because there's actually, one of the arguments is between what exactly we had there.
Yeah.
Was it a consulate or was it a mission, a diplomatic mission? And since you work for the State Department, maybe you can explain to me what's the difference. I know what an embassy is. That's where we sit in their capital and we process visas and things like that, and we talk with the government. A consulate, you process visas and all, but it's not in the capital usually.
Yes.
What's a mission?
A mission is, there's probably legal terms of when I'm aware. A mission is a general term. So our embassy in Tripoli
They're all
Tripoli is a
missions.
mission. They're all missions.
Okay.
So Hicks's title technically is Deputy Chief of Mission.
I see.
So the number 2 at the embassy.
So was this a consulate in the sense that we were, I guess a consulate, when I think of a consulate, I think of a place to get your visa stamped,
Yeah.
or something like that, or give you an exit visa, or maybe if a Libyan wants to come to the United States, they could go there.
So it's an interesting case on a lot of levels, including this. When the uprising broke out, the American embassy in Tripoli was, of course, evacuated and was trashed. I mean, burned to the ground, practically speaking.
At this time?
During the
Gaddafi.
during the Gaddafi
Right.
revolution.
That makes sense.
During the Gaddafi revolution.
Right.
Now there was a revolution. The core of the revolution was in Benghazi, and we dispatched then not Ambassador Stevens, then a representative to the revolution, what's called the TNC, the Transitional National
Because
Council.
that was actually a lot safer for us in Benghazi.
That was a lot safer, and that was who we were going to work with.
Right, we're fighting Gaddafi, the government.
Exactly.
We don't want to be in his capital city where he's still in control. We want to be where the rebels are that we're helping.
So
that
we
makes
had
sense.
a consulate in Benghazi, certainly during that period. It wasn't, of course, an embassy because it wasn't the capital, but it was the representative to the revolution. And that's really where Ambassador Stevens made his first impact in Libya, before the revolution was successful.
Can you tell me, without, of course, disclosing any classified information, what is the annex?
You
Or
know,
is the
I'm going
answer
to
I
have to
can't
follow.
tell you without disclosing?
On this, I wish I could, but I think I'm going to have to follow the
then I'll tell you
congressman.
what. Then I will tell you what has been reported about the annex. And again, you can answer whatever questions you're authorized to answer. It's been reported that the annex was CIA headquarters. It's been reported everywhere, apparently, but from our government. And in fact, in this very testimony, Gregory Hicks starts talking about the annex, Darrell Issa, the chairman of the committee, says, can you please explain what the annex is? And he turns to someone, and he turns back, he says, okay, don't explain.
Yeah.
So it's been reported, you don't have to confirm
Congress is always good for comedic effect,
Yes.
I think is what we've learned.
Several congressmen have asked about the annex,
Yeah.
and the answer is always, check your classified information. But I don't care. I actually avoided a security clearance, even though I worked in Congress precisely so I could go in the media, and I can tell our listeners that it's been reported widely in the media that this is a CIA operations center that was supporting the consulate. So let me ask you, we're going to take a break, but when I come back, I want to ask you in general, hopefully you can answer this question generally, about the role the CIA plays in foreign countries. Because it's supposed to be an intelligence collecting agency. That's what it's called, Central Intelligence Agency. And yet in this case, according to all accounts, the annex was actually the guard for the embassy.
Yeah.
And I didn't think the CIA was supposed to be an armed guard. So I want to talk about that and also talk about the role of Libyan militias that were also supposed to protect the embassy, the consulate, and why everything failed. Folks, if you want to call in, please join the conversation at 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275.
She's had more than a dozen fractures. And in the next few years, she faces 2 major surgeries to strengthen her fragile bones. She's only 10 years old. Most people don't worry about fragile bones until late in life. For those with osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bones are a concern throughout their lifetime. Find out how you can strengthen this child's future.
Diabetes is a killer. After I was diagnosed, I didn't feel sick, so I didn't listen to my doctor. Then it struck. I had a heart attack, then a stroke, and I was only 49.
Most people with diabetes also have high blood pressure and cholesterol, which can cause severe heart damage. In fact, 2 out of 3 people with diabetes die from heart disease or stroke.
Don't let diabetes destroy your life.
Call for your free diabetes survival guide. Choose to live.
situation in Benghazi and really trying to give a lot of the background to understand what the controversy is all about. My guest is Ari Ratner. He is, like me, a fellow with the Truman National Security Project, but he's also a former State Department official. He was special assistant to the Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment. Basically, he was the Middle East guy at the desk of this official, and he can give me some insight and give you some insight into how this all worked. If you want to call in, I want to encourage you to do that. Just pick up the phone. You can dial toll-free 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275, or locally 571-749-1166. So, Ari, I know you can't tell me what was in the annex. I've reported that, the press has reported that it was CIA. But I would like to ask you in general, and this isn't just a question about Libya, what is the role of the CIA in connection with our embassies, our consulates, our State Department abroad? Because the CIA was started to be the Central Intelligence Agency. It's our spy master. They're supposed to go in with operatives, find out information, report that information to the policymakers to decide what to do, and no one seems to object to that core mission of the CIA. But for the last, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years, it seems the CIA is almost the America's private army, and it may well have been in this case. What is the proper role of the CIA, and what's the actual role of the CIA?
It's a wonderful question because it's evolving, and it has evolved in many senses. And you're right, during the Cold War, the CIA was not only an intelligence agency in the sense of collecting information, but also an action agency, oftentimes covert. Now, oftentimes, the CIA will traditionally work at an American embassy or an otherwise American diplomatic facilities, just like we'll have a military attaché, just like other countries do. It's not unusual.
Collecting information, that's their proper role. But when we went in to get Osama bin Laden, we used SEAL Team 6. Now, that is not the CIA. That is the military. Why isn't the military, namely Marines, perhaps, or I don't care, Army, Navy, Air Force, why wasn't the military protecting the embassy?
In the case of Libya, it's difficult for me to answer. I mean, the normal situation is, of course, that it's American Marines.
Is it because it was not an embassy, it was a consulate or a mission? Is that the reason why there were no Marines?
My understanding, the Pickering report looked at this, and some of it had to do with the flexibility of the military deploying, which seems a little weak to me as a reason. But
clearly there was a need. I mean, you were talking about the chaos in Libya. So Gaddafi's fallen. There is a government, a newly elected government, actually a pro-American government, but it's weak.
But it's weak. And I think you've seen since 9/11 a blurring of the roles of the CIA, very much involved all around the world in action, including in drone strikes in Yemen, places like that. So lines may have become blurred, and it's something at a macro level, much beyond just this Libya issue, we should look at as a country.
Let me just ask you as a macro level, why isn't the military doing military strikes? Or even covert? Can't the military be covert? Does it have to be the CIA?
It's a wonderful question. I think it's got to do with a lot of different issues, including, so sometimes legal issues, sometimes all sorts of questions.
CIA, it appears, does America's dirty work. They do the things that the military doesn't want to be caught doing, or the FBI doesn't want to be caught doing, because it's all covert. And I mean, famously in the Iran-Contra affair, we do something off the books, and that seems to go to the CIA.
Yeah, I think the way to look at it is, look, after 9/11, which was obviously a tremendous attack on the country, there was a real push from the Bush administration first and continuing with the Obama administration to have a prevention mode when it came to terrorism all around the world.
As there should be.
As there should be. There's pros and there's cons to that kind of thing. And we may be at a point now where we want to dial back a little on what the role of the CIA is versus what the role of the military is. But the CIA was clearly very forward-leaning in that fight. And Libya, in a sense, like the rest of the Middle East, was processed and was drawn into what is a much larger conflict, which is the war against al-Qaeda and the war against terrorism.
So tell me again, so Libya, Gaddafi's gone. We have a weak government in power. Is the Libyan army? Is there a Libyan army? Maybe that's the first question.
Yeah, there is, but in the sense that there's a Libyan government in name only.
The militias won the war.
The militias
the
won the war.
former army was Gaddafi's army.
Was Gaddafi's militia is probably the best way of looking at it.
Okay, and that army doesn't exist anymore.
Correct.
Or at least they're not in fighting force. So, in essence, Libya is controlled by the very militias that won the revolution.
Exactly.
And there's presumably one in Benghazi and one in Tripoli
different ones.
And different ones. Yeah. And the government is at least their titular head, the people who instruct the militias what to do.
Exactly.
Now, for some reason, and I think this is something that the Pickering Report and many others have looked into and need to look into, for some reason we trusted a Libyan militia to guard this consulate?
Yeah, it's confusing, I think, for everyone. I think it's hard. Again, I wasn't in government this time, and I certainly wasn't.
I'm not blaming you for any of this. I want to be very clear.
The embassy,
I just want to understand, is this a standard practice?
No, it's absolutely, of course, not a standard practice. It is, of course, a standard practice to work with local officials. So everywhere in the world,
but
in Paris,
but not for security.
Including for security,
right. So,
right? Like the Paris police.
Yes,
help
if we're in France, we trust the Parisian police. If we're in London, we trust the English police.
But even in the Middle East, I mean, you
But
often
in Yemen, I don't think we would trust the
I haven't been to Yemen, but I've been
to
most of our Middle Eastern countries, and there's a security perimeter normally done by the host country or the host government or the host city.
I doubt we have an embassy in Somalia.
So not in Somalia, but even.
But my point is, in failed states or states that are weak.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had an attack in Kenya. We had an attack in Tanzania. We've had attacks in Saudi Arabia and Lebanon. It would seem that this is something that we should have foreseen, that Libya was not a stable place and would need security, and that we couldn't trust the local militia.
Yeah, I would say this. I mean, I would look at this almost in the sense of an airplane crash or some horrible disaster where there's multiple things that have to go wrong. Clearly, that's an important factor. Who is providing local security? There's an intelligence factor. There's a factor of, should the ambassador have been there on a given night versus anything else? There's a hardening of the structure factor. There's all sorts of factors that went into it, and all of which I think will have to be looked at very carefully and in a nonpartisan way to make sure something like this, to the best of our ability, because nothing is totally preventable.
Right, and I want to get at this before I even get to the talking points and all, which I think is more of a partisan conflict. I just want to get to the basics of defending our people abroad, because after all, an embassy, a consulate, that's one of the toughest places to defend. It's a lot easier to defend New York City or Washington, D.C. It's a lot harder to defend a small group of Americans surrounded by what could be a hostile population, although obviously Benghazi was basically friendly. So we still don't really know why the security was set up. I'm talking about before the attack, the way it was, because once the attack occurred, there's all kinds of arguments about what we could have done in the 7 hours since it began. But I want to go back to a month before it began, 2 months before it began, and ask, I guess, who would be in charge of that? Apparently, two people have been fired already. Maybe those were the people that were in charge of that?
Yeah. Well, so you have different people in charge on different levels. I think basic principle of American diplomacy, that the chief of mission is the ambassador himself. And the ambassador is responsible for everything that occurs under that mission control in his country. So in Libya itself, the ambassador who...
Now, it's been reported Ambassador Stevens asked for more security. Is that true or not?
I don't know the details of that. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Again, I wasn't there, but it's been reported that he has. And frankly, obviously, in retrospect, it's a good practice, but it's not unusual for American ambassadors to request more security in many places. It's a common practice.
And just from what I understand, and I have not read the Pickering report, but from what I understand, it went up one level of the chain of command. It did not get all the way up to Secretary Clinton. That level turned him down, and that level's been fired. But I guess my general question is, Marines are usually the ones to defend not just embassies but consulates too.
Correct.
So the question would be, in Libya, why no Marines? And do we have an answer to that yet?
Yeah, I'm unaware of what the details, if there even were Marines or not.
See, my impression of this whole thing was that we wanted to keep it semi-undercover. So I don't know whether it was a real consulate or not. Here's my guess of what's going on. And again, I don't have classified information. It's just my reading the tea leaves. That this was a CIA mission more than a diplomatic mission. And that our goal was, well, originally we were there relatively secretly because we were helping the revolution against Gaddafi. We weren't going to inform the government about this. So it began quite properly in that role. And we didn't actually do the appropriate transition once the Libyan revolution succeeded. And so it began as sort of a covert operation that should have become non-covert, because in becoming non-covert, you get Marines, you get contingency plans, you get the Army to come help you, you get a formal designation as a consulate, which still, to me, I'm not clear whether we had that formal designation. And because it began in this secretive fashion, that may be why it didn't have the security it needed when the time came. I don't know if you feel about it.
Again, I mean, I don't know. I didn't work on it to a level, so I'd be remiss to comment. I would say this. The government is slow moving, including on things that it should be fast moving. So a transition, which looks like a long time, and in fact, several months, is in a planning stage still pretty slow. So a lot of this stuff might have been coming down the pipeline. The U.S. government is operating, the State Department in particular at this time is operating in a very budgetary constrained manner. So a lot of this I don't know the truth of what you're saying versus what I'm saying. I just give, a lot of it, it's a terrible tragedy, and one of the tragedies maybe we should have just moved quicker.
Let me ask you this: when you were the special assistant undersecretary, I assume you did a lot of traveling throughout the Middle East.
Yes.
And you probably saw many of our both embassies and consulates there.
Yes.
Were they all defended by Marines? Pretty much. You don't recall anyone defended by a local police force or?
Well, I mean,
Army
again, as I said, and I want to be very careful not to get into
I don't
security
on
US.
I don't want you to tell me we're relaxed in our security.
U.S. missions, but
this
you
was
would see
unusual circumstances.
you would see governments helping. I mean, it's a layered defense like any hardened target.
Now, you were in Cairo on September 11th last year, and in Cairo, of course, that morning before the Libyan attack that's gotten so much press, our embassy in Cairo was attacked, and they actually got over at least the outside perimeter walls.
Yeah, or at least got on top of the outside perimeter walls. I wasn't at the embassy at the time. I was in Cairo on an American business mission. It was the largest business mission we've ever sent to Cairo. It was designed to reinforce our ties with Egypt, which is a very important country and a very important ally still. And it was a 3-day mission from September 8th to September 11th. So this was the end. I was in the embassy all the other days, but this was the last day, and we were at our final press conference. This was a joint U.S. government, U.S. Chamber of Commerce mission, so fully bipartisan or nonpartisan. And news of this reached me and the people I was with when we were at dinner. So it was.
You didn't even know it was happening?
Until I was contacted on my BlackBerry, no. And I went home, and what was happening in Libya was totally unclear. Like everyone else, I was just getting news until the next morning.
To the extent you can, and we may have to go into the next break, can you explain what worked in Cairo? We're always about what didn't work in Libya. Something worked in Cairo because a big mob went in. They got at least on the roof. They went through the outer perimeter. They're clearly anti-American, far more anti-American in Cairo, I think, than in Benghazi. And yet we managed to stop that attack.
Well, I think, again, I mean, very different situations. The people in Cairo were protesters, not terrorists. I mean, they might have been anti-American, but not clearly intent on committing a terrorist attack. And as far as I know, they just got to the outer perimeter, top of the wall.
That's an important distinction, and one I want to get to after the break, because these individuals had designs on our embassy. They weren't just protesting, and we originally thought they were because of Cairo. If you want to dial in, 888-488-MARK. Back after this.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs or to make a tax-free donation, contact cfrip at AOL.com.
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems,
we're back to the
and
Inside
what
Scoop.
parents can do,
Here again,
visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America and readings from
Levine. So we're talking about the situation in Benghazi and trying to really give the underlying environment before the attack so that we can truly understand what happened during the attack. My guest is Ari Ratner. He is a fellow with the Truman National Security Project, as am I, and he is a former State Department official who was in charge of Middle Eastern branch of a certain part of the State Department. So Ari, this annex is the safe house, or whatever you want to call it, is set up. We don't have Marines there. You could argue that maybe that's good because it doesn't draw attention to it. But whatever the case, the terrorists knew we were there. Maybe Americans didn't know we were there. And again, I don't know if you can comment specifically on this because I don't want to breach a clearance. But let me just ask you in general. When we have a foreign policy where our enemies know what we're doing, and our friends do not know what we're doing, and the American people do not know what we're doing, that would seem to me to be counterproductive.
Well, again, I wouldn't necessarily say that's the case here, but clearly support of the American people, including support of the Congress, is a very important principle in American foreign policy and something to be upheld. And I think the Obama administration, for the most part, has done a good job of convincing the importance of our intervention in Libya, trying to rally, for instance, in Syria to make sure we have support for the American public.
I'd have us do more.
Yeah.
And I've been on the...
I'd have us do more too.
On the record about that.
But it's a difficult situation. And I would say this as well, again, without talking about Benghazi in particular, but there's always a trade-off between more security and more openness. And it's always important to have better contacts, whether it's political contacts, whether it's intelligence contacts, whether it's economic contacts among the local population. And there's a trade-off with that and security. The more you're out in the field, so to speak, the less secure you are. And you never want to be so walled off that you can't do anything.
But here's what I don't understand. So in Egypt, you have a populace that could very well have some reason for not liking America very much. We supported a brutal dictator, Hosni Mubarak, for decades.
Yeah.
We did pull our support, thank you Obama, 2-3 weeks before he fell. Better late than never, but clearly we supported him for a couple decades. I can understand why the Egyptian people might not have any great love for America, although the Egyptians I've met actually have been very friendly. But Libya would be the opposite. I mean, Libya, we were against their dictator. We supported the people of Benghazi. It would seem to me that in Benghazi, we would have no fear of being open and the out and having a consulate defended by Marines. That if anything, we'd be more secretive in a place like Egypt than a place like Libya.
Yeah, again, I would say, the situation in Libya, like any country, is very, very complicated. And there are a lot of people, including there were big demonstrations after the attack, who do stand with America and who want to have a strong relationship with America. And the government itself sees America as a critical ally. There are, of course, more Islamist groups, including very extreme Islamist groups who view America as an enemy, and different factions who have differing relationships. It's a full spectrum.
So where was the pro-American Benghazi militia? Ansar al-Shari is clearly an anti-American militia, may well be affiliated with al-Qaeda. Where's the pro-American Benghazi militia? Were they the ones assigned to defend? Did they run out of fear? What do we know about that?
Yeah, I don't know much, to be honest. I know no more than what I've read in the papers. But my understanding is we had a working relationship with different factions. And I don't know what happened on the night, certainly.
So Ansar al-Shari, do we know whether, so there's been some discussion about whether or not, clearly it was a terrorist attack, but whether or not they had planned it on that day, September 11th, or not. It seems to me logical that what Susan Rice first said on Talking Points actually could well be true in the sense that this is a terrorist attack. They plan to go after and get us at this mission. But they hadn't really decided on the date yet.
Yeah.
They saw what was happening in Cairo because of a stupid film on the internet and decided to run home and get their mortars. And in fact, there was an early intelligence account that they literally started the attack, ran home, got more supplies, and came back, which would suggest that even though these are terrorists, it wasn't necessarily planned for that particular moment on that particular day.
Yeah, again, I think there are a lot of people smarter than I looking into exactly what happened. But both the timing as well as the method of the attack is going to have to be really closely examined. It was looked at by the Pickering report, probably in the classified section, and will have to be continually reassessed.
Now, Ambassador Pickering was on Meet the Press talking about his report opposing Darrell Issa, the chairman of the House Government Affairs Committee, the one who's really looking into this. And Pickering basically said, we looked at all of this, and you have all the classified information, Congressman Issa. And ISIS said, well, you didn't give us the names, and people said, yeah, we did. It's in the classified section. What specifically, I mean, is there a there? So the ARB, the Accountability Review Board, the internal State Department has gone in there and said, this is what happened. There were mistakes made. Clearly, in hindsight, there wasn't enough security. Is that sufficient? If not, why not?
Yeah, and let me say the ARB wasn't the internal State Department review. It was Ambassador Pickering, who's no longer with the State Department, who's a very well-respected
So it's like
official.
an inspector general.
It's like an inspector general working with Admiral Mullen, I believe, so a military official. So these are two nonpartisan officials with very long history in American national security, not tied to either party. And I think they took a very close look. Can you look again at what they did? I'm sure we should continue. Congress itself, of course, should continue to look. But that should be done in a very serious way, not in a partisan way.
See, I think we can all agree, in hindsight, that this place was not adequately guarded. It's very easy once a piece of glass falls on the floor and breaks to say that glass was too close to the edge of the table. But the question really is not whether there was inadequate security and people died. That's an important issue, and that's what I focused on for the first half. But the Republicans seem to think there's a cover-up here. And for that cover-up, they're mostly focusing on not what happened, but what happened afterwards. There's this talking points memo that comes out where Susan Rice is given the evidence from the intelligence committee and from the intelligence community, and there appears to be a turf battle between the CIA and the State Department, each wanting to get their side into the talking points. Tell us about that.
Well, look, anyone who's worked in government, and you have listeners from Virginia, so I'm sure there's a lot in the audience. That's
including a lot of my crew.
Yeah, that's not unique. A turf battle in government, whether it's between CIA and State Department Defense, I worked a lot, State Department and Treasury, is pretty much an everyday occurrence. And it wouldn't be strange to me on such an important issue and such a devastating attack that you'd have difference in the language, including purely for bureaucratic reasons.
So the backstory is that the State Department believes the CIA messed up because this was their mission. It wasn't really a State Department mission. It wasn't formal. The CIA set it up. They did the annex. They did the mission. It wasn't a formal embassy. That's why there were no Marines. Y'all messed up. And the CIA says, no, State Department, you messed up because we told you the British ambassador had been tried. There was an assassination attempt there. We told you they tried to breach the security walls. We didn't give you enough security. And basically, you have both sides firing at each other.
Yeah, again, I wasn't in government, so the exact dispute is unclear to me. But that the State Department and CIA would have different views of what happened is pretty regular. I mean,
how well do I don't know if I can ask you this? How well does the State Department and CIA work together on a regular basis? I mean, how much are y'all working in and how much times are you working in opposition to each other?
So in the area of State Department where I worked with, very, very seldom I worked on economic issues. I worked with Treasury a lot, or the Commerce Department. Other parts of the State Department deal with more military issues. So we have a Bureau of Political and Military that works very closely with the Defense Department. Other parts deal with more intelligence. So I'm sure that works very closely with the CIA and other intelligence agencies.
But whose role is it to defend an American diplomatic mission?
It's a great question.
Is it the State Department? Is it the military? Is it the CIA?
I mean, it's clearly, you have a concept in government of the whole of government. An American official, the chief of mission, isn't just a State Department employee, he's also the representative of the president. And it's the role of the government in general, and the government in general should work together on that. Ultimate responsibility, of course, lies with the president, but with different, and it will flow in different areas. So it's hard to say in a simple sense, but everyone should be working together towards that aim.
So the allegation is that Susan Rice, and I really don't know how they can pick on her, because she basically read the memo they gave her to read. Maybe they should have given it to Jay Carney, or maybe they should have given it to the president's valet. I mean, it could be anyone, but there's no evidence that Susan Rice was personally involved in any of this, is there?
None that I'm aware of, and there's certainly no evidence of a cover-up. I mean, if we're going to be honest about it.
Well, here's what they charge. They charge that the original memo that the CIA wrote had prior attacks. In other words, the threat to the British ambassador, prior attempts to scale the walls, and that the State Department took out that prior attacks. What's interesting about it is none of it relates to what happened in Benghazi, but to whether or not there should be mention of prior attacks in the memo or not. This is the Republican smoking gun. You understand?
Yeah, it's not much of a smoking gun. again, I wasn't involved in any of this.
No, I understand. I'm not asking you personally.
I would say this. I worked in Hillary Clinton's State Department, and it would be shocking to me if there was a cover-up of anything. She's a very serious person who believes in this country very strongly. And I'm certain that she wants to get to the bottom just as much as anyone else. And they've taken a few of her words, what does it matter, I think is the phrase, where she's really trying to point to how do we do this?
How do we go from here? How do we get adequate security?
And they're making it seem as if she doesn't care. When in fact, if anything, they're the ones who are using this as a political weapon, and I don't want to make it all Republicans, just a few very self-interested congressmen.
Now, Under Secretary Kennedy is apparently a career professional of more than 30 years and has there's been a lot of criticism of his role in this. Do you have a comment on that?
No, I know him personally, but I don't even know him very well personally. I worked with him, but I wouldn't make a comment on Undersecretary Kennedy. I mean, a lot of the officials involved, what's interesting is a lot of the officials involved aren't, I was a political appointee in the Obama administration, so I came in with the administration, I left. A lot of the people they're talking about, Victoria Nuland is the press official, is a career person that actually worked for Dick Cheney.
That's an interesting point.
Undersecretary Kennedy is a career person.
So
Thomas
in other words,
Pickering
if
is a
Victoria
career person.
Nuland took out information that the State Department put in, this is the same woman that worked for Dick Cheney.
Yeah,
again,
exactly.
she's not.
And she worked in Democratic and Republican.
She's not a Cheney political. She's simply a career. So it sounds to me like this is a very important point, that the people that Republicans are complaining about are not really any political officials, but really the career professionals that may or may not be right or wrong, but it's not Obama or Hillary Clinton that's directing these people, or Susan Rice for that matter.
Look, ultimately, of course, the secretary is the secretary, but on an issue like this, certainly before the attack, the secretary wouldn't be involved on a daily basis of the security situation in Libya or any other country. The secretary's got to worry about the whole world.
And who is in charge of that?
Who's in charge? You have different officials at different levels, but ultimately you have an assistant secretary and then a deputy assistant secretary who would be in charge of security at embassies. And
Deputy Assistant Secretary of State.
Deputy Assistant, so the levels are, you have a secretary, then you have a deputy, then we have an under.
And it is the State Department, so it's not the military that's in charge. The State Department would direct the military how to defend the embassy?
The State Department's certainly in charge of the embassy, but both its operation, its maintenance, its security, the whereabouts of the military in that chain, they liaise with the military.
Okay, we are going to have to get to the bottom of this. We do have another break. If you want to call in and add your 2 cents, we're encouraged to do so. 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. There was a problem in Benghazi. It doesn't seem like it was one of politics, maybe one of bureaucratic incompetence. Be right back.
Listen to smoke before you give it a try.
Only you.
Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about rigged out money. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home? When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
This is Mark Levine. My guest is Ari Ratner. He is a former State Department official, a special assistant to the Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment in charge of the Middle East. So Ari, it's easy to focus on something that goes wrong. When President Obama had a stimulus package and 98.5% went to helping the economy, 1.5% went to a failed company by the name of Solyndra. Everyone's heard of Solyndra. No one's heard of the 98.5%. One of the things you said to me in the break, people are focusing on the 4 Americans that died in Benghazi. A few are focusing on the fact that we successfully toppled dictator Gaddafi with the help of the Libyan people and, of course, the United States and the world military. How many casualties were in that war?
Total, if you include the 4 people tragically lost in Benghazi, 4.
So nobody died.
Nobody died.
Not a single American.
Not a single American died, and we only spent $2 billion doing it.
And we only spent $2 billion. Compare that to, say, to $1 trillion spent in Iraq, where, and some would say when you include post-traumatic stress and healthcare and so forth, it could be up to $3 trillion in Iraq. And of course, thousands of American dead, tens of thousands wounded, and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis dead. And I think we're doing better in Libya than in Iraq right now. Is that fair to say? The Libyan government is more pro-American than the Iraqi one?
Well, that's certainly the case, and Libya remains a difficult situation, as does Iraq. But I would say this: I knew Ambassador Stevens. I didn't know the other people who were lost, but he was someone who believed in the importance of our relationship with Libya, and he's someone who ultimately sacrificed his life in that. And I wouldn't dare speak for him, but I would speak for a lot of the people who worked with him, who don't want his life work to end up being a political football, or don't want his life work to be lost in a tragedy. That's still an important relationship for us, and it's still one that requires careful diplomacy.
That's amazing. I don't know how many Americans realize that we did not lose a single, no wounded either.
Not that I'm aware of. I think we might have had a plane crash in Italy, but that might have been the British. So.
Okay, but no
Americans were killed.
Dead,
as far as I know, no one wounded either.
No one wounded. That's and again a much cheaper war. So again, and listen, I'm asking you tough questions because my hope is that we protect our other diplomatic missions and consulate and embassies all around the globe, particularly in places like Libya. Yemen would come to mind, Saudi Arabia. I mean, Lebanon. I don't think we have any in Lebanon, but
we have an embassy in Lebanon.
We do have an embassy in Lebanon. Okay, I hope that's well protected because obviously, our embassy in Berlin probably doesn't need as much protection.
But an embassy anywhere needs protection.
Because
you never know. You never know. And look, it's an important thing. I mean, one thing that the Democrats have thrown back at the Republicans, which I don't want to use a political football either, but they had hundreds of millions of dollars slashed from the State Department budget for security for embassies.
Well, let's talk about that because Congress, of course, is the ultimate power of the purse. They're the ones who appropriate all the money for security for embassies. So millions of dollars were slashed for embassy security? Even before the sequester?
Yeah, even before the sequester. Many millions from the request. It's a complicated issue because you have a request and then you have what the totals were.
And the embassy was requesting a standard increase. It wasn't an extraordinary increase?
Embassies around the world, so diplomatic security around the world, was requesting a pretty heavy increase. If I recall, it was quite a lot of money.
And that's because of the Arab Spring, I presume.
In part because of the Arab Spring, in part because of evolving challenge, in part because there was a need to upgrade many facilities. I mean, this has been a process of upgrading American diplomatic security diplomatic facilities since the attacks in East Africa.
And it was the Republicans in Congress who slashed this stuff.
Yeah, of course.
What reason did they give? Just unnecessary waste, presumably, in government?
The budget. I mean, I think the reality is the Republicans were bringing down state and U.S. aid, which is relatively speaking, it's about $50 billion, so about a tenth of what we spend on our military, actually quite a bit less than a tenth of what we spend on our military. It's a pretty good investment for the American people, and this is part of that, part of a systematic draining of our foreign aid.
I think we should be asking the Democratic ranking member of the Government Oversight Committee maybe to call some of the Republicans in Congress to the stand to talk about why they advocated slashing aid for the State Department. Because clearly more aid was needed, more security was needed. Everyone agrees on that, but obviously it requires money to do that.
And none of this was malicious. Of course, the Republicans weren't hoping for something like this to happen. But I would say this. diplomacy can't be reduced to security. So inherently, there's going to be risk. If we're going to be in places that are risky, there is risk. And every place in the world has some degree of risk. So there needs to be spending on security, but there needs to be smart investments in other things. Public diplomacy, educational exchanges, economic assistance. All of this is really cheap investments in very important long-term benefits for the American people.
How is Libya today? Do we have a mission in Benghazi today?
I'm unaware in Benghazi. We still have a mission in Tripoli. It's pretty understaffed. A lot of our embassies in the Arab world are under high security contingencies where they have non-essential people go home. But there are people still in Libya. There are people.
Now, even in Egypt today, we don't have a fully staffed embassy in Cairo?
In Cairo, I think in Cairo the security situation is
better.
Is worrisome, but it's not like it is in Libya. So as far as I understand, the embassy is fully staffed in Cairo. Some of the dependents may not be there, but I'm not sure.
Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Yemen.
Yemen is again a more difficult security situation.
I would think so. Extremely difficult. We're sending drones there. There's a large Al Qaeda service there. I hope we are fully defending our diplomatic mission in Yemen, or we should get out if we can't do it.
I've never even been to Yemen, but of course I think it's very important.
Probably one of the most dangerous places we have a diplomatic mission in the world.
Certainly a dangerous place, but.
So now there's been a lot of discussion of the 7 hours between when the first attack occurred, the breach occurred, then Gregory Hicks testified, the people from the annex, that was the contingency plan, by the way. That was that the people from the annex would come and save them. And apparently 6 very brave people did manage to hold off 60 people for a period of 7 hours. But Tripoli was too far away. The Hicks tried to charter a plane to send people from Tripoli 600 miles. That's, I guess, a 2-hour flight. There's an Air Force base in Italy, which is pretty far away. So clearly the annex was insufficient. Do you believe that something could have been done, obviously we have hindsight, in those 7 hours to save ultimately Ambassador Stevens?
Yeah, I think Ambassador Stevens, if I understand the report, was killed very early on. It was two.
In fire.
Yeah, in a fire pretty early on in this, and it was 2 people who were lost later. I'm unaware of what could have been done. I'm very sympathetic to Gregory Hicks's standpoint, which is that he of course wanted to do everything in his power to help. But there were people who were charged in the military and in other places of working out that response, and they had to make difficult decisions as well. So it's easy to criticize from hindsight. The criticisms may be right, they may be wrong, but it's obviously a very difficult situation. It's like the plane attacks on 9/11. Should we have brought down the plane that hit the Pentagon? Of course. Did we have the fighters in the area? No. So it's a difficult situation.
It's always easier with hindsight. So I want to talk about the politics of this. Obviously, there is a real question here that we need to get to the bottom of in terms of security. And there's also a political issue. Hillary Clinton, it's widely believed, is running for president in 2016. Some people believe that this is a way of taking her down. What's your view on that?
Well, look, I mean, American system has politics, and politics has its role, and the political role is important. But a lot of this is using what should be a very serious issue, how to protect our embassies, how to conduct a foreign policy that works for Americans and protects Americans, and making it a political statement. I saw Congressman Issa saying this wasn't about President Obama or Hillary Clinton. I think most people realize, at least to some extent, that's a motivating factor.
Whatever he's saying, we certainly know that right-wing talk radio...
Kalarov is running an ad.
Exactly. They're running ads, they're collecting money. Fox News has been talking about Benghazi for many, many months. I was actually on Fox and Friends, and I was the first to tell, this before the debate with Romney, that Obama did call it an act of terror the day after. Which they didn't seem to remember.
I would also just lend my Republican friends free political advice. It's not going to be a particularly successful strategy for a presidential campaign 4 years from now.
Right, because no one believes that Obama wanted, or anyone wanted, this tragedy to happen. In any tragedy, you have to find out what happened so that you fix the mistakes. But it's unclear what's being covered up. Again, they're mainly talking about these talking points, which were changed several times. But the talking points that were changed mostly were about, they actually said it wasn't a consulate, it was a mission. That was one change. And the other change is whether or not to mention prior attacks or not. If it can be shown, and maybe it can be shown, that the State Department scrubbed mention of prior attacks, is that a cover-up?
I mean, to me, you'd have to show that there's a cover-up. You'd have to think of very serious cases where there was a cover-up in American history. Does this rise to the level of Watergate?
Yeah.
Does this rise to
Jake Carney, the press secretary, said it was just stylistic change. He had to backtrack and say it was more than a stylistic change. Let me ask you, though, what Senator Feinstein had to say, because I thought this was very interesting. And it raises questions about the role of the CIA and the State Department. She said this on Meet the Press. She said, I think the talking points should not be written by the intelligence community. I think the intelligence community should not be doing talking points for members of Congress. And our report, meaning the bipartisan Senate report, will in essence say that. So my question for you is, the intelligence community's role, it seems to me, should be in providing intelligence, providing the data, saying what happened. At 1:15 this happened, at 12 midnight this happened, this. But should the intelligence community even be writing how to what are talking points? It's how to spin it. It seems to me that politicians, maybe people like you, maybe you should be spinning it, but Dianne Feinstein believes that the intelligence community shouldn't even be writing talking points. What's your view on that?
I think it's a very smart way of looking at it. Obviously, the CIA role, to some degree, it's a false divide because any presentation of facts is spinning on some level, and everything is going to be selective, especially in the nature of intelligence. But clearly, the CIA shouldn't be at the forefront of framing government debate. That should be the role of other parts of the government. The CIA's foremost role should be providing intelligence and making sure that we have the best information possible.
It's been reported during the Bush years that Dick Cheney literally went into the CIA and talked with some junior analysts and sifted through evidence on Iraq, found some information that he liked, suggesting a connection between Iraq and al-Qaeda. This was the famous German informant Curveball, who turned out not to be telling the truth, and took that little cherry-picked piece of intelligence and brought it up, and that became our Iraq war. Is there any evidence that anyone in the Obama administration is doing that same kind of thing, literally cherry-picking intelligence, taking the parts they like? Do we see something of that nature? Because that would be, I think, a very severe complaint, if true.
I agree with you, it would be, and I don't think anyone has even made it such an accusation.
Right. So the irony is,
I certainly don't believe anything
the same
like that.
Republicans who didn't seem to mind Dick Cheney cherry-picking information are complaining because talking points were revised?
Yeah. And talking points get revised on every issue under the sun. I mean, it's a very common practice.
I assume, did you ever write speeches for your boss?
I was a speechwriter.
There you go. So how many times did speeches get changed before they were sent?
Nonstop. And by the way, what's on the paper doesn't mean that that's what the official says.
Exactly. So I'm not sure. I think just to conclude, it seems like there is a there with regard to embassy security worldwide that we do need to look into. But in terms of cover-up, pretty thin.
Yeah, exactly.
Ari Ratner, thank you very much for coming on the Inside Scoop. If you want to know more about the Truman National Security Project, go to trumanproject.org. I am a fellow as well. If you want to know more about the Inside Scoop, go to my website, marklevinetalk.com or radioinsidescoop.com. Follow me on Twitter at marklevinetalk and let me know what you thought of tonight's show. Thank you.